Let's explore the anatomy of an API call, which I think is best done with a demo. I'll get started just as I did in the previous demos, with the imports and getting the key. And then I get to this part, which is where I make the call to the API. Let's focus on this first line, the URL. The URL is what specifies the endpoint that will be called. In this case, it's the chat completions endpoint. However, there are other endpoints available, for example, completion, embeddings, images, and more. Next up, let's focus on the headers. In this case, I have content type and authorization. The headers contain the API key, which is used for authorization, and I also set the content type. Optionally, if you're within an organization, you may need to pass the organization ID in the headers. Now, let's move on into the data. The data contains the parameters that are passed to the API. This is the request body pretty much. Here you specify the model, messages, and temperature, among a few other parameters. Let's go over each one of them. The API has multiple different models. It's worth noting that not all models are available in all endpoints. Or said it differently, each endpoint is capable of using only a subset of the models. There's a diverse set of models with different capabilities and price points. Let's move on to the messages. A message is a unit of text within a conversation. A conversation typically consists of a series of messages that allow guiding the model's behavior and receive coherent and context-aware responses. Each message has a role and content. The content is the actual text of the message, which can be input, questions, instructions, and responses. Basically, it's the prompt. Now, what's the role? The role indicates the identity of the sender of the message. These are the options. User is the end user interacting with the model. That's me, you, or the user of your application. System provides instructions or context to the AI model, and assistant are the responses generated by the AI model. This is important in case you want to continue the conversation. In the upcoming module, we'll talk about best practices and some tips and tricks. But just to give you a preview, there are tactics that you can follow. For example, you can ask the model to adopt a persona, or you can request to answer in a particular style, like Shakespeare or an angry person. The next parameter is temperature, which is pretty important. Temperature is used to control randomness or creativity in responses generated by the model. You can control the output by adjusting temperature. This is one of the most important settings, and there are several possible values. Temperature goes from 0 to 2, with 1 being a practical limit. So 0.2 or lower generates deterministic responses. It's not guaranteed they will be exactly the same, but almost. 0.5 balances randomness and creativity. I actually use 0.6 and maybe 0.7 in several cases. And 1.0 or higher makes the answers more random and creative. In some cases, a little bit too random, but I'll let you be the judge. Next up, the call is made using requests.post, and I pass the URL, the headers, and the data. That's the request body, and a timeout. Now, when I make the call, I get back a response. The response is the model that's generated by the output. All this. It's a response in natural language, and it specifies a finish reason, the why the answer was sent back, which could be stop, the natural stop, length, null, because it called a function or a content filter. Let's see what was returned. And here it is. My prompt was, tell me a joke. And here the message, assistant, which is the response, says, why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything, which is actually a pretty good joke. Finish reason, stop. Here's the model that was used, GPT-3.5 Turbo, with the version, and then the usage, which, as I mentioned, it might be important to save because it will tell you the usage of you and your users. And now, let me talk about the Python library. As I already showed you, the process is very simple. There are multiple classes that you can use. I'm going to use dir over here to list them. And here they are. These are the top level classes in the OpenAI library. And if I use dir on chat completion, I can see here the methods that I use. For example, create, which is the one that we use to make a call. And this is the anatomy of an API call to the API. For additional information, you can consult the API reference and the documentation in platform.openai.com.